I live in a small town in Oregon where time passes slowly and everyone knows their neighbors by name. In a place like this, nothing is a bad omen, so that weekend at the cottage was supposed to be a quiet holiday. But I will never forget that night, which left me frightened and confused, with no answers to many questions. It was a normal autumn, when the leaves had already begun to turn yellow, and the air was crisp and a little spicy with the scent of pine needles. I have a small country house on the shore of a lake that I try to visit at least once a month. It's a place where you can forget about work and just enjoy the peace and quiet. The house is about 20 minutes away from the nearest neighbors, surrounded by a dense forest that turns into an impenetrable thicket in winter. I arrived here late on a Friday afternoon. As usual, I parked the car in front of the house and took my things inside. The house seemed exactly as I had left it last time, clean, comfortable, and a little chilly from the lack of heating. As I lit the fire, I could feel the room getting warmer and the comforting crackle of the wood added to the sense of calm. Late that evening, after dinner and a couple of cups of tea, I sat in the armchair by the fire with a book, but I soon realized that the fatigue of the working week was taking its toll and my eyelids began to close. I turned off the light and went upstairs to the bedroom on the first floor, deciding that it would be better to go to bed early. Waking up in the middle of the night was sudden and unexpected. I was awakened by a sound outside, like someone walking on the dry leaves outside the window. At first I thought it might be the wind or an animal, but the sound didn't stop. It was a rhythmic creaking, as if someone was walking purposefully across the garden. Switching on the nightlight, I slowly got out of bed and walked over to the window. The moon was bright enough for me to see the yard, but I couldn't see anything suspicious. Yet the feeling of unease never left me. Something was wrong. I heard the sound again, closer, as if someone was coming towards the house. It seemed to me that someone was standing at the front door. The silhouette, slightly illuminated by the moonlight, was human, but the person didn't move, just stood staring at the door. My heart beat faster. Who could it be? I don't know what made me stay where I was, not making any unnecessary movements, but it turned out to be the right decision. The figure at the door suddenly began to move slowly along the wall of the house, approaching the living room window. At that moment, the moonlight washed over his face, and I saw something that sent shivers down my spine. It was a man wearing a clown mask. His plastic face was contorted into an eerie grin that was both indifferent and sinister. I was paralyzed with fear. This person was standing at the window as if to look in, but fortunately the house lights were out and he didn't seem to see me. For a few seconds, which seemed like an eternity, he stood there without moving. Then, as if on cue, he took a step back and disappeared again into the shadows of the house. My heart was pounding in my chest. I went downstairs quietly, trying not to make a sound, and picked up the phone from the kitchen table. My first thought was to call the police, but I immediately realized that the mobile phone coverage in the woods was not very good. I tried anyway. No signal. What could I do? I decided to go back upstairs and look out the window to see what was going on outside. Maybe I could find out where he'd gone and what to do next. But when I reached the first floor and peered out of the window, I was struck with horror. The figure was standing at the door again, this time holding something shiny, like a knife or a tire iron. There was no doubt in my mind that this man was going to break into the house. I didn't know what to do. I could not call the police. I was alone in the house, and if he broke in, no one would help me. His clown mask was fixed on the door, and I knew that if he came in, I wouldn't stand a chance. I started down again quietly, trying not to make any noise. I had an old hunting rifle that my grandfather had left me, but was it loaded? I wasn't sure. I found the gun in a dark shed, but the ammunition, as far as I could remember, was somewhere in the garage, which was outside. The only thing left to do was to try to escape or find a place to barricade myself. I went back into the living room, and suddenly I heard a loud knock on the door. The sound made me jump, and then another knock, as if someone was trying to kick the door open. I knew it was strong, but would it hold? Suddenly, everything went quiet. I froze, listening, but all I heard was the heavy beating of my own heart. I took a step back, and just then something heavy hit the window. The window shook, but it didn't break. He tried again, but this time the glass shattered. I realized he was about to come in. The only thing I could think of was to hide. I rushed into the storeroom, hoping its heavy wooden doors would protect me. It was cramped and dark inside, and I could only hear my breathing and footsteps, then silence. I sat in the storeroom, not knowing how much time had passed. Hours seemed to have passed, but perhaps it was only minutes. I was afraid to open the door, but I had to find out what had happened. I gathered all my strength and opened the door slightly. The house was dead quiet. Everything looked just as I'd left it, except for the window. It was broken, and there were shards of glass on the floor. I cautiously approached the window and looked out, but I didn't see anyone. I didn't know where the man was or if he had left, but I wasn't going to stay in the house another minute. I grabbed the car keys and went out the back door, trying not to make any noise. My heart was pounding in my chest and I didn't dare look back. I jumped into the car, feeling safe at last, though not completely. I started the engine, pressed the accelerator, and drove out onto the road. When they arrived, the house was empty. The man in the clown mask was gone, as if he'd never been there. The police searched the house, found a broken window, but no sign of the man. The only thing they found were footprints on the ground around the house, leading into the woods. The police were unable to find any evidence, and the case remained unsolved. One of the officers on duty at the time told me later that such cases are not uncommon in remote areas. There are people who deliberately choose such houses, knowing that there are no witnesses and that they can remain elusive. This person could have just been passing by, or he could have deliberately chosen my house to play cat and mouse. I still don't know if it was an accident, a cruel joke, or something much more terrifying. When I moved into this old house on the outskirts of town, I couldn't help but marvel at its history. The house was huge, with high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and a spiral staircase leading up to the attic, which was always locked. The locals said no one had lived in the house for years, and those who tried didn't stay more than a month. I didn't believe in local superstitions and thought they were just old wives' tales. I was 27 years old and worked remotely, which allowed me to live anywhere. I was attracted by the price and the opportunity for privacy in this house, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. I enjoyed the peace and solitude, although sometimes I had a feeling of utter loneliness, as if the house was hiding something, watching me from the shadows. But I quickly dismissed these thoughts, chalking them up to tiredness and isolation. A week after moving in, I began to notice strange things. At first, they were small, finding books I'd never touched on the table, feeling a slight draft of cold air, even though all the windows were closed. Then I started waking up at night with the feeling that someone was watching me. But every time I turned on the light, the room was empty, and I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. One rainy evening, as a storm ripped through the sky, I was sitting at my computer as usual, trying to finish an important project. Suddenly, I heard a soft knock on the door. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the knock repeated, this time more insistent. I got up and went to the door, looking through the peephole, but no one was there. Probably just some kids playing a prank, I thought, and went back to my work. But a few minutes later, the knocking returned, this time louder and longer. I quickly approached the door, but when I opened it, there was still no one there. A feeling of unease began to creep in, but I tried to calm myself, telling myself that it was just someone teasing me. Back in the study, I sat down at the computer again but couldn't focus. The house's silence suddenly became oppressive, as if the walls were closing in on me. I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, I heard a new sound, the creaking of floorboards coming from deep within the house. I froze, listening. At first, the sound was barely audible, but then it grew louder, closer, as if someone was sneaking down the corridor. This is impossible, I thought, trying to stay rational. Maybe it was just a rat or some other small creature, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The sound was too distinct, too human. I stood up and slowly moved toward the sound. My heart pounded in my chest, every muscle in my body tensed. As I approached the corridor, the creaking grew louder, and I could have sworn I heard someone breathing. I tried to light the corridor, but the lamp suddenly flickered and went out, leaving me in complete darkness. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around only to see emptiness. The feeling of fear became almost unbearable. I felt like someone's eyes were boring into me from the darkness, but I couldn't figure out where. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, telling me one thing. I was no longer alone in this house. I decided to call the police, but when I got to the phone, there was no signal. The internet was also down. This can't be a coincidence, I thought, desperately trying to come up with a logical explanation. But when I turned to the window to see if anyone was outside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a handprint on the glass. It was smeared, as if someone outside had tried to get in by scratching at the glass, leaving dark streaks. Panicked, I started locking all the windows and doors, trying to stay calm even though the fear and panic were becoming unbearable. I tried to barricade the front door, but my hands were shaking and the terror paralyzed my thoughts. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the back of the house. I heard someone furiously trying to break in. At that moment, I realized that whoever it was already inside. Fear gripped me. I knew I had to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I backed slowly towards the stairs, trying not to make a sound, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching my every move. As I reached the bottom of the stairs leading to the attic, I suddenly heard a low, menacing voice whispering my name. It was coming from above, from the attic, where I had never been. My heart was pounding, and I decided that my only hope was to climb into the attic and lock the door behind me. I ran up the stairs, each step echoing loudly. The attic door was already ajar, and I pushed it open, holding my breath. Inside, the attic was dark, with only a single moonbeam breaking through the small window, illuminating part of the dusty floor. I froze, listening, but the house was deathly silent. An unbearable fear gripped me. I knew that someone was following me, but where were they now? The silence was suddenly broken by heavy footsteps below. Someone had begun to climb the stairs slowly. The footsteps were measured and confident, as if the pursuer enjoyed the approach. In a panic, I closed the attic door and found an old, rusty latch. I locked the door and ran to the far corner, trying to be as quiet as possible. The footsteps stopped at the door, and I heard someone breathing heavily on the other side. For a moment, everything was quiet, and then there was a loud bang, as if someone had hit the door with such force that it shook on its hinges. I gasped for breath as I felt the walls begin to close in around me. Then, in total darkness, I heard a sound, a faint, barely audible sound, but unmistakable. It was scratching, coming from the corner of the attic. Slowly turning my head, I peered into the darkness, and there, in the shadows, I saw something that seemed to be moving. The shadow was stretching, changing shape, as if trying to tear itself from the ground. At that moment, the door to the attic began to crack under the blows. Someone outside was trying to break in with frenzied force. I cowered in the corner, desperately trying to find a way out, but I knew there was nowhere to run. The attic was a trap. The footsteps on the stairs grew louder. I realized it wasn't just a person, it was something else. The figure in the corner began to take on more distinct features. It was something horrible, distorted, like a nightmare image from the depths of the subconscious. It moved towards me, and its eyes, two glowing embers, bored into me as if it were peering into my very soul. At that moment, the door burst open, and the creature that had entered was only steps away from me. It was a man, but his face was twisted with unnatural malice, his eyes burning with hatred. He lunged at me, but at the same moment the creature from the corner leapt at him, their collision creating a deafening crash. I didn't know what to do. My only impulse was to flee, to escape. But the attic offered no escape. I closed my eyes, praying for a miracle, but knowing there was none. The noise of the fight was deafening, and I felt something cold touch my shoulder. When I opened my eyes, the darkness surrounded me. The creature that distorted reality around it reached out its bony hand towards me. It was no longer trying to hide. Its target was clear. I felt my life slipping away, my mind plunging into a deep, bottomless pit of terror. In that moment, as the darkness completely consumed me, I realized that this house had never been empty. It was alive, ancient and insatiable, and now I was part of it, consumed by its eternal hunger. The story I had heard from the locals was true. The house never let go of those who crossed its threshold. I had become its latest victim, and the horror I had experienced would become just another story told to those who dared to come near this place.